to be watching. Welcome to the Sixth Bugle Podcast. I'm your host, Rudy Ruiz. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the 2024 SAFER grant updates that could significantly impact you and how your department approaches staffing grants this year. Let me start with the bottom line up front. The SAFER program for this year has undergone some significant changes, and if your department is considering applying for hiring activity grants, you need to understand these changes before you start your application process. Today we'll cover the major changes of eligibility requirements, cost-sharing structures, performance periods, and scoring criteria. I'll also walk you through a practical example of how the new cost-sharing calculations work, and at the end of the show I'll tell you how you can get a form-fillable PDF that can help streamline your application process. Now let's start with the basics. The SAFER program has two main activities: the hiring activity and the recruitment and retention activity. We're going to be focusing primarily on the hiring activity since that's where most of the significant changes have occurred. The hiring activity provides grants to support applications for hiring new additional firefighters or to change the status of part-time or paid on-call firefighters to full-time positions. This is often the lifeline of smaller departments' needs to meet NFPA standards and improve community safety. Now here's the first major change that's going to affect how you plan your applications. The period of performance is now locked at 36 months. This isn't negotiable anymore. Once FEMA approves your application, you get a 180-day recruitment period, and then the 36-month performance period starts automatically whether you've successfully hired your firefighters or not. It is critical for planning purposes. In the past, departments might have had some flexibility, but now you need to be absolutely ready to hit the ground running with the recruitment efforts. The clock starts ticking the moment your application is approved. Here's something interesting though. If you manage to hire all your SAFER funded firefighters during the initial 180-day recruitment period, you can request to start the performance period early by submitting an amendment. This could actually work in your favor if you have a strong recruitment process already in place. Now let's talk about what's probably the most significant change that's going to affect your budgeting and planning: the cost-sharing requirements. This is where I really need administrators and chiefs to pay close attention because these numbers are going to directly impact your department's financial planning. Under the new structure, hiring activity grant recipients must contribute non-federal funds as cost share. Here's how it breaks down. Years 1 and 2, you must contribute 25% of the actual cost incurred. Year 3, you must contribute 65% of the actual cost incurred to that. But here's where it gets more complex. The federal funding is capped based on what they call the usual annual cost of a first-year firefighter in your department. Federal funding cannot exceed 75% of the usual annual cost in years 1 and 2, and in year 3 it drops to just 35%. Let me walk you through an example providing this documentation, which really illustrates how this works in practice. Let's say your department's usual annual cost for a first-year firefighter is $120,000. This includes base salary, excluding non-FSLA overtime, plus your standard benefit package: health, dental, vision, insurance, FICA, life insurance, retirement contributions, the whole package. Now let's assume your department actually incurs $100,000 per year for each year of the grant. Here's what your cost sharing would look like. In both years 1 and 2, your contribution is $25,000 and federal funding cannot exceed $90,000. In year 3, your contribution is $65,000 and federal funding cannot exceed $42,000. As you can see, departments will feel the real financial pressure in the third year. By year 3, you're essentially taking on a majority of the cost, which is FEMA's way of ensuring departments can sustain these positions long term. The good news? FEMA doesn't require you to demonstrate availability of cost share funds at the time of the application. However, they may contact you providing once the award to receive that you necessarily have the funds in place. Here's something that will require careful attention. When you're preparing your application, FEMA will not fund any projects, activities, or line items that are covered under your department's normal operating budget. This language has been strengthened in the 2025 updates. This means you need to be very clear in your application about how these new positions represent additional capacity, not the replacement of existing budget items. You can't use SAFER funds to backfill positions you should be funding through your regular operations. There's also a new requirement that I want you to make sure everyone understands. Applicants must certify that their annual budget for fire-related programs and emergency response has not been reduced below 80% of the average funding level from 3 years prior to the application date. This is FEMA's way of preventing what they call supplanting, essentially assuring that local governments aren't cutting fire departments' budgets and then using federal grants to make up the difference. It's a reasonable requirement, but you need to document it and be prepared to defend it in your application. The scoring structure has been refined for 2025, and understanding this can help you craft a stronger application. The panel score accounts for 50% of your total score application. Broken down, it's as follows. The project description is worth 30% of your panel score. You need to clearly articulate why your department needs these positions. Don't just say you need more firefighters. Explain specifically how these positions will be used. Will they allow you to add a 4th fire on your engine company? Will you open a new station? Will you eliminate brownouts? Reduce overtime costs? Be specific and quantifiable. You also need to address how these positions will enhance your ability to protect critical infrastructure in your primary response area. This is particularly important if your district has hospitals, schools, industrial facilities, or other high-risk occupancies. The impact on daily operations is worth 30%. This section requires you to articulate risks. How are your community and current firefighters at risk without these additional positions? More importantly, how will that risk be unequivocally reduced if you receive the grant? That's the specific language you're looking for. Unequivocal risk reduction. Now, the financial need is also worth 30%. You need to provide a detailed income versus expenses breakdown of your current annual budget. Don't just provide the numbers, explain your precise budget shortfalls and why you can address these staffing needs without federal assistance. Document what other funding resources you pursued. State assistance programs, other grants, local funding initiatives. FEMA wants to see that this grant is part of a comprehensive funding strategy, not your only effort to address staffing needs. And finally, the cost benefit, which is worth 10%. Quantify the benefits. If these positions will reduce overtime costs, calculate those savings. If they improve response times, explain the operational and community safety benefits. Explain the compliance and liability benefits if they allow you to meet NFPA standards. In 2025, updates continue to emphasize the 1710 and 1720 compliance, and you need to understand that specific priority scoring matrix. Your current compliance level directly affects your application's priority ranking. The priority levels are structured as follows. Under high priority, you never or 0% of the are compliant with NFPA standards, or you're rarely or 1 or 19% compliant. Medium priority includes those that are sometimes compliant, or 20 to 39%. Half the time, 40 to 59% compliant. The low priority is when you're very often, or 60 to 79% compliant, or most of the time, or 80 to 100% compliant to NFPA standards. This might seem counterintuitive. Departments with the worst compliance get higher priority, but it makes sense from FEMA's perspective. They're trying to help departments that are the furthest from meeting national standards. If your department already has good NFPA compliance, don't let this discourage you from applying. You need to strengthen your case in other scoring areas. There are several administrative changes that will affect how you submit your application. First, FEMA Go will no longer support Internet Explorer. Ensure that you are using a current browser when accessing the system. There's no cost share requirement for recruitment and retention activity grants, which continue from previous years. However, extensions of the period performance are now only allowed for recruitment and retention activity grants, not for hiring activity grants. So, if you're applying for hiring funds, make sure your timeline is realistic because you won't get any extensions. The 2025 updates also include new language about hazard-resistant building codes under the additional information section. While this primarily affects other FEMA programs, it's worth noting as part of the overall federal focus on resilience and risk reduction. Based on these changes, here are my practical recommendations for departments preparing for the 2024 SAFER applications. Start your financial planning now. With the new cost-sharing structure, you must ensure you can meet the 25% match in years 1 and 2, especially the 65% match in year 3. Don't wait until you receive an award to figure out how you will fund this. Document your current staffing levels. You'll need detailed information about your NFPA compliance rules. If you aren't already tracking this data, start now. Response time, staffing levels per apparatus, coverage areas, all this needs to be documented and quantified. Calculate your usual annual cost. This number drives your entire cost sharing calculation. Include everything: base salary, health insurance, dental, vision, FICA, life insurance, retirement contributions. Don't underestimate this figure because it caps your federal funding. Prepare for your 180-day recruitment period. Have your recruitment plan ready to go. Your job descriptions, hiring process, and background check procedures need to be streamlined because once that award comes through, you're on the clock. Build your case for additional positions. Remember, you can't use these funds for normal operating budgeting items. These need to be truly additional positions that expand your capacity, not replace existing funding positions. Don't underestimate year 3 costs. The 65% cost share in year 3 surprises many departments. Make sure your local officials understand this commitment before you apply. And don't rush your application. With the new 36-month locked performance period, you can't afford to submit a hastily prepared application. Take the time to build a comprehensive case. Don't ignore NFPA documentation. Even if your compliance isn't perfect, document what you've done to improve. Show a plan for progress, not just current shortfalls. Don't forget about sustainability. FEMA wants to see that you can maintain these positions beyond the grant period. Have a plan for how you'll fund these positions long term. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to emphasize that while these changes to the SAFER program might seem challenging, they're actually designed to ensure that grants go to departments that truly need them and can sustain the positions long term. Preparing and realistic planning are the key to success with the 2024 SAFER grant program. Start working on your application early, involve your finance people in the cost sharing calculations, and ensure your local officials understand their multi-year commitment. Remember, FEMA is looking for departments that can demonstrate real need, have a solid plan for using these positions effectively, and can sustain them beyond the grant period. If that describes your department, don't let the changes discourage you from applying. We have a resource to help you navigate this application process. We've created a fillable PDF that walks you through the SAFER application and key components, incorporates the changes we discussed today, and includes worksheets for calculating your cost sharing requirements. If you'd like to receive this free resource, email info@thesixthbugle.org with 2024 SAFER Guide in the subject line. We'll send you the PDF along with a checklist of supporting documents you'll need to gather for your application. Now, before I sign off, let me remind our regular listeners that we always appreciate your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. If there are any other grant programs or administrative topics you'd like us to cover, reach out to us at info@thesixthbugle.org. For our fire chiefs listening, remember that successful grant applications often require input from multiple people in your organization. Ensure your administrative staff, finance people, and operations personnel are all involved in the planning process. Well, that's all for today's episode of the Sixth Bugle Podcast. Thank you all for listening, and remember, the paperwork might not be glamorous, but it's what keeps our departments funded and our communities safe. Until next time, stay organized, stay informed, and take care. Have a good day.